Hello, troublemakers. Welcome to this week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast. Well, troublemakers, we are here. We are here at this point of the season where we will highlight a male labor leader. Now, just so you know, I know it looks like we've been just highlighting all females, and it may seem unfair to half the population, but female labor leaders are my jam, and those are the ones that just came to me in the moment. And to be fair, their stories did kind of intertwine. But I digress. This week, we are highlighting Phillip Randolph. Phillip Randolph was born April 15th, 1889. Shout out to the Aries in Crescent City, Florida, to James William Randolph and Elizabeth Robinson Randolph. James was a tailor and Methodist Episcopal minister. Elizabeth was a seamstress. In 1891, the family moved Phillip and his older brother to Jacksonville, Florida, which at the time had a thriving African-American community. Phillip recalls that he learned that character was more important than color when it came to judging people. And from his mother, he learned that education was important, but mama didn't raise no bitch. And self-defense was right up there with education. Mama was like, somebody put their hands on you, then you return the favor. Phillip remembers that one night his father, he tucked a gun in his waist and went to the local county jail to prevent a mob from lynching a black man. His mother stayed behind with a rifle across her lap. James and his brother excelled in literature, drama, and philosophy. He played baseball, sang in a choir, and graduated as valedictorian in 1901. After graduation, Phillip worked some odd jobs while devoting his life to singing, acting, and he enjoyed reading in his spare time. But he couldn't really find a job that wasn't manual labor, so he moved to New York in 1911. While in New York, Phillip continued to work odd jobs while he took social science classes at City College. In 1913, Phillip laid eyes on Lucille Campbell Green. Lucille Campbell Green was born April 15th, 1883, shout out to the Aries, in Christiansburg, Virginia. She was studying at Howard University to be a teacher when she met her first husband, Joseph Green. The couple moved to New York. She taught school, but eventually she started going to Lilia Beauty College. It was one of the beauty colleges or beauty schools that was founded by Madam C.J. Walker. Lucille opened and ran a successful salon that catered to the black elites in the neighborhood. Lucille made enough money to support both she and Phillip. However, they never had children. In New York, Phillip started a friendship with a Columbia Law student named Chandler Owen. They adopted the beliefs of socialism and the ideals of the International Workers of the World. Shout out to the Wobblies. Phillip and Chandler both believed that black people should have legal and economic equality, which I'm sure they weren't the only ones that felt that way at that time. Hell, I feel that way today. So they opened an employment office in Harlem that provided job training for Southern migrants, and encouraged them to join radical unions, which, I guess, that makes sense because not all unions were radical. In 1917, with the help of the Socialist Party of America, he and Chandler started The Messenger, a radical magazine that spoke up against lynching. They spoke up against World War I. They urged black people, to resist the draft, fight for integrated society, and to join radical unions. That's a lot to ask. Not just any unions, radical unions. At the time, the Justice Department called The Messenger the most able and most dangerous of all Negro publications. In 1917, Phillip organized the Union of Elevator Operators. In 1919, he organized a group of black shipyard dock workers. They called themselves National Brotherhood of Workers of America. The union dissolved in 1921 after 2 years, however, under pressure from the American Federation of Labor. And by pressure, I mean racism of America. In the 1920s and 30s, one of the largest employers of Black people was the Pullman Company. It was founded in 1862. The Pullman Company started as a manufacturer of railroad cars. By the late 19th century, the company drastically had a monopoly on production and ownership of sleeper cars. These are basically the cars that, when you catch the train, there's a bed in there where you can sleep for long trips. And so since this was the lion's share of mode of transportation for folks, they were very, very popular and very profitable. The company gave financial support to Black churches, newspapers, and other organizations, the same way that, all of these, these large corporations like to celebrate Black History Month and Juneteenth and Pride Month to make them look like, that they're just so, liberal and just so open and inclusive, when in fact they are the shittiest of employers and they hate all of us and they just want our green money. But the company, also paid the porters well enough to have a middle-class lifestyle. But working at Pullman, it wasn't all juices and berries. Porters depended on the tips for the majority of their income, which basically meant they basically depended on the kindness of the white folks that they served on the trains to make up, some of their salary. The company also required porters to travel 11,000 miles, which was approximately 400 hours per month, to earn the basic wage. Porters on regular assignments worked an average of 73 hours per week and made 27 cents per hour. Workers in manufacturing jobs for Pullman, they worked 37 hours a week and made 54 cents an hour. The porters spent 10% of their time in unpaid prep and cleanup time. So they had to prep the cars, they had to clean up the cars, but this was unpaid time. Kind of like how the stewardesses are fighting today about the unpaid time that they have to, report to the flight. And they had to pay for their own food, lodging, and uniforms, which was deducted from their pay. Y'all, when I tell y'all, when I was at Long John Silver's 100 years ago, and I had to buy my own work shoes. I'm talking about my own work shoes. I threw a full-on tantrum. I have so much respect for these men right now. They were charged if a customer stole a towel or a water pitcher from the rooms. They were not eligible, to promote to conductor jobs, which was also part of their duty sometimes. And then, troublemakers, on top of all these benefits that I just listed to you, for them having the honor of being a Pullman employee, all the porters had to be called George. Yes, they were not called their own names. Every one of them was just George. So if somebody saw just a Black man in a uniform, George, excuse me, George. Hey, George, let me holler at George. Hey, George, let me get something from you, George. Like, for real. So I can't even be called my own name. And this was a throwback to, they paid homage to George Pullman, who was the owner of the company. And it was kind of like how back in the day, the slaves would take on the names of their master. That is literally why this concept was created, because they were not people. They were all just George. Now, the Pullman Company was very proud of their practices and their policies, including this ridiculous call all the Black men George gag, right? But it wasn't funny to a lot of people. So, in 1914, this lumber baron named George W. Delaney, as a joke, he founded this club called the Society for the Prevention of Calling Sleeping Car Porters George, the SPCSCPG. And what he did was he mailed out membership cards, like 45,000 membership cards to people named George, all over the world asking them to join his society because he thought it was just kind of ridiculous that these grown men were being called George. And even though it was a joke, the club started to grow, and the Pullman Company didn't like being the butt of jokes because we are a serious company. So in 1926, this gag, it persuaded the Pullman Company to install these little racks in each car displaying a card with the name of the porter on duty, the name their mama gave them. And they found that of the 12,000 porters and waiters that was working at Pullman at that time, only 362 turned out to be named George. So there was that. In 1925, an organizer named Ashley Troughton recruited Phillip to organize the Sleeping Car Porters. The Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters was established in August 25th, 1925. The key to its success would be to get the largest ports, the largest train stations, which was Chicago, Oakland, and St. Louis, on board with organizing all the Pullman porters. They chose Phillip because he didn't work at Pullman, and therefore, he couldn't really be retaliated against or fired. For years, like all good employers, Pullman pushed back against the unionization of the Pullman porters. They even started their own. They even started their own company union. That they were gave the employees an option to be represented by this new employer-led union. The company-led union would be called Pullman Porters and Maids Protective Association. I cannot wait for the day that my employer will come to me and say, hey, I got a union for you, and we run it, and we make the decisions, and it has the word protective in it. But anyway, after 10 years of legislation, after 10 years of actions, a contract between the Pullman Company and the Sleeping Car Porters was signed on August 25th, 1937. It raised wages for porters and maids, established a basic 240-hour a month hours of work, with overtime starting at 260 hours. And the company also agreed to provide uniforms for workers after 10 years of service. Through the success of the Pullman campaign, Phillip became one of the most visible activists of the civil rights movement. In 1941, he and other activists proposed a march on Washington to protest racial discrimination in war industries, access to defense employment, and a proposal of an anti-lynching law and desegregation of the military. It was canceled after President Roosevelt found out about this march, and he issued Executive Order 8802, or the Fair Employment Act. A lot of Phillip's allies felt betrayed. They really wanted to do this march because, their thing is, okay, he signed this Fair Employment Act, but the order only banned discrimination within war industries and not the military specifically. In 1947, President Truman asked Congress for a peacetime draft law, which basically meant that, the men would sign up for the draft during peacetime. Phillip started organizing young black men to not register for this new selective service. In 1948, Truman, because he needed the black vote, basically, he abolished racial segregation in the armed forces with Executive Order 9981. In 1963, Phillip was a key organizer for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Yes, troublemakers, that March on Washington. The March on Washington where Martin Luther King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech. In 1965, Phillip and fellow activist Baynard Rustin founded the A. Phillip Randolph Institute. The organization was formed, as a way for black trade unionists to continue to fight for racial equality and economic justice. Today, its mission is to continue the political struggle for all working Americans. With more than 150 chapters in over 40 states, the A. Phillip Randolph Institute members are involved in nonpartisan voter registration, voter education, voter mobilization efforts, and community education projects. So, yes, they are still active, as well as Coalition of Labor Union Women, who I will always shout out, and as well as Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. The A. Phillip Randolph Institute is still up and running and needing your membership. Phillip died in his Manhattan apartment on May 16, 1979. He had a heart condition and high blood pressure. He had no known living relatives, as Lucille had died in 1963, shortly before the march. And that, troublemakers, is my rendition of the story of Asab Phillip Randolph. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, because I enjoyed researching it, as I do all of my episodes. And this is the part in the show where I give my flowers to, someone that's in the labor movement right now, someone who's, doing their part, because we're not going to wait for them to retire. We're not going to wait for them to not be here with us anymore. We're going to give them their shout out right now. And this week, I am going to give my flowers to Elijah Edwards. Elijah Edwards is a Illinois Department of Human Services Staff Development Specialist. He is from Chicago, Illinois. Yes, born and raised. He is currently in his 4th term as president of his local. Not only does he give his very limited time to the local, he is also involved in a lot of community organizations in Chicago. He's involved in 100 Black Men of Chicago, the Chicago CBTU Executive Board, the Alliance for Community Services. He's on the board of Black Labor Week Project, which, yes, everyone, we will discuss Black Labor Week at some point on this program. He's the AFSCME People Region 1 Cook County Vice Chair, and he's a Council 31 Executive Committee, and he's in the 100 Black Men of Chicago chapter. He's the chairman of Health and Wellness Committee, and he helps organize college scholarship fairs, so yeah. That's Elijah in a nutshell. Like I said, he does it all. Elijah is that strong brother who he will drop everything on this list that I just spoke of to help you, to help anyone, because he is as seen on TV, and what you see is what you get. I am proud that he is on our side of the table. Again, thank you, Elijah. And thank you for listening. And don't forget to follow us. Don't forget to like us. Don't forget to share us. Don't forget to rate us on Instagram, Amazon Music, and Spotify. As always, peace and solidarity. This week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast is produced by The Create Place Studio. You can find them on all social media platforms at The Create Place STL. We Won is performed by Joe Jinks and written by John O'Connor. This has been Resolve Labor Podcast. As always, peace and solidarity.
Everybody come and join in the union. Begin. Stand together to overcome soon, and we win.